It's my great pleasure. It is my real great pleasure to welcome to the Luck on Sunday studio for the first time, though not to this programme for the first time, somebody who simply needs to be introduced as the First Lady of Australian racing. But I would rather say, Gai, the First Lady of global racing, because it's been a great tour, hasn't it, over the last few weeks and months. I've seen you in Kentucky, Epsom, it's Ascot this week, and doubtless at home in between times. I know you've been in Hawaii. You look so fresh on it.
Well, wouldn't you?
I would.
Exactly, Nick. No, I've had a fantastic trip. It's been a trip of a lifetime. Every so often, every few years, we stay away for about 3 months. We learn plenty, always see things that you may not see back at home. My father had a wonderful expression. He used to say, but you have to go away, Gai, to see the trees from the forest.
That is interesting.
Yes, and you come back and you see your training establishment in a totally different way. And you're able to say to Adrian, who's my co-trainer, dot, dot, dot. And while I've seen things away, I'll text back or take videos of it and send it back to him. It doesn't always go down as well as I hope.
Adrian is Adrian Bott, your training partner. How has that worked these last few years, and how have you divided the responsibility?
Well, I probably stepped back more, wanting... It's no use if I turn up at the races. You know, people want to come to me. It's his business. He bought the business. He bought this, and he has he rents the stables from me. I'm there to literally do whatever he wants me to do. I'm there. I go to, and I work with the babies in the barriers. That's my forte. I love that. I love that they can jump cleanly. I think it's very important in racing that horses jump from the gates cleanly, especially in America and Australia, New Zealand, you know, anywhere where it's fast. Hong Kong. And you can put your horse in a position. People say, oh, you just want to lead. I said, no, I don't, but I want to be in a forward position. And Aidan O'Brien and Henry Cecil never missed those. You know, once you're in a forward position, you can firstly, if you're leading, you can take control of the speed in the race. And you saw that in the Derby only last Saturday. Or you can be in the front part of the race, and you've only got to run that far to win the race instead of that far to win the race. So I've got this on, tell all your viewers, because it's pretty freezing in here.
Do you know what? We can bring it up. I always find it's either like a fridge in here or a furnace. There's very little in between.
We'll keep it the fridge.
We'll keep it the fridge, I think, just for the time being. There's just sort of there's a gentle breeze kind of blowing across the studio. I wanted to try and drill down into where your real passion was sparked. Everyone knows that your father was the late legendary T.J. Smith, who had such an influence over Australian racing. Was your sort of affinity for the animal there right from the word go?
Yes, it was. I mean, I'm an only child, so they send only children into space. So, you know, we're sort of a bit one-off. And you spend a lot of time with your parents, and of course your parents become your best friends because you don't have siblings. And so I'd go to the track with my dad, and he'd put me on the front of his baldy pony called Cornflakes, and we'd ride out to the centre of Randwick. Now, it's not like the Heath at Newmarket or when you go to Lambourne, but it's in the middle of the racetrack, and in those days we'd go to Centennial Park, which was quite close, and we'd go and look for duck eggs and things like that. So, you know, I had this wonderful youth around the stables. You know, I had pussycats I'd bring home and all the other things, and I was around the horses all the time and the stable lads, and I just loved it. It was just inbred into me, you know what I mean? So
it was an idyllic childhood?
Yes, it was, and I didn't go to school till I was 7. So that's probably why, to all of you people out there, why sometimes people say I'm a bit unusual.
You probably learned more not going to school.
I did. It's amazing. And you learn to use, because you're an only child, you have to entertain yourself. So you learn to use your imagination. So, you know, you can then be not tied into a constricted mind thing. I'm sure people that have spent a lot of time by themselves and have to, as children, entertain themselves.
From what I've read about your father, he obviously was a very talented man, but a very, very determined man.
Well, he had to be, Nick, because he had nothing. He had no money. So if you haven't got any choice, there's only one way, and that's up, isn't it? And so he was very determined to get out of the poverty he was tied into, and he did it very well. And he used his wit, and he had an incredibly retentive memory. And he was a very intelligent man. He didn't have the advantage like you and I do of going to school. So he had to live literally on his wits, and he married a very well-educated woman in my mother, Valerie, and he knew he needed someone like that to sort of guide him and help him in life.
Tell me a little bit more about her, because we read a lot about him, we read a lot about you, we don't read so much about your mother.
No, Mum had a lovely... She said, I used to be Tommy's wife, but now I'm Gai's mother. She was great. She was a complete and utter support system, and yet was very capable. She had a beautiful singing voice. One of her claims to her singing career was that she ran second in a Stedford to Joan Sutherland.
Really?
Yes, now that's many years ago, and some of your younger viewers wouldn't know of Joan Sutherland, but she was the great voice of Australia and the great operatic voice. And Mum had a beautiful voice, which Dad was very proud of. But she was also very, vivacious and gregarious, and had lovely poise and beautiful clothes. And, she was a real lovely sort of, lovely yin and yang for Dad.
Great foil for him.
Yes, a great foil, yes.
And I suppose also, in a sense, that you're just starting to buccaneer at the time when ownership was sort of changing slightly as well, and I guess that kind of level of entertainment in the sport became slightly different, became slightly more advanced. So you possibly needed that partnership.
Dad, we hadn't gone really into partnerships then. We're talking back in the 60s and 70s. But what Dad had the most amazing ability to do was to communicate with his owners. And there's a wonderful video, there's a film on George Moore, the great jockey who rode over here, and Dad, and how Dad was sitting on the side of the bed in the Southern Cross Hotel in Melbourne, making all his calls. Firstly to the reporters, then to the owners, to stable staff, whatever. And he did it from 7 a.m. every morning, and he'd do it for about an hour solidly, because we had no texts, no emails, no TikTok, none of the things we have nowadays.
And when you were growing up, you were very much following in your mum's footsteps. You were a performer. Was it going to be a life of performance for you?
Well, I thought all along that's all I wanted to do, was to be an actress, and I came to England with my parents and was able to get into LAMDA. I'd already got into NIDA in Australia, but Dad wasn't keen for me to do that. And in those days, you did what Dad or Mum said, and so I didn't do that. And then I got into LAMDA and landed a role in a four-hander with Patrick Cargill from Dear Father, Father Did I Have Them, what it was called. And
so you hit the ground running.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I turned away formal training and went on the road and spent the next 2 years travelling around England, and I even got to Copenhagen and Toronto, so I was quite well travelled.
So were you always quite restless like that? You always wanted to see new places, inquisitive and...
And I wasn't a restless person. I'm not a restless person, but I was determined, incredibly determined, probably still am, and I wanted to be successful in the acting career. But I realised after about 3 years of doing it, Nick, that it wasn't the life for me, that I didn't feel I was good enough to be a Kate Blanchett, or a Nicole Kidman, and that's where I wanted to be. And so I thought, well, Dad kept ringing up and saying, look, what's the matter with you? Come home. I'll disinherit you.
OK, so, yeah, I can sort of see the way this was going.
He wanted me to come home. And, it was a passion that I'd sort of not... I suppose it hadn't been scratched. And my uncle passed away. Dad had two brothers he worked with, Dick and Ernie, and my uncle Dick passed away, and so there was an opportunity for me to come into the business. I
saw you're brilliant on social media. I saw your Instagram post the other day that you just received another royalty cheque from your... Yes. This was Doctor Who.
Doctor Who 40 years ago. I still get it. I couldn't say I could keep body and soul together on it, but it was so nice to get.
That's brilliant. And of course, I'm just about familiar or remember because Australian soaps in my youth were kind of a big thing. Now I don't remember you in it, but we did poach this clip of you in was it Young Doctors?
Yes.
Young Doctors. Just take a look at this.
Trouble is that hospitals these days are staffed by young men who put on white coats, shove a stethoscope in their ears and call themselves doctors.
That was you.
That was me, yes. When I first returned to Australia. And, you know, and I
It
had
was a big show. It was a big show in its time.
Oh, it was
wasn't
very popular young doctors. Shane Dye said to me, he said, I never realised you were such a bitch. I said, Shane, I'm an actress. Let's get it right, you know. What you see on the screen isn't really real.
So this chapter of your life came kind of gracefully to a close, and you did go home.
I did go. I woke up one day, it was December, it was cold, I'd finished the Doctor Who series, and I thought, I haven't got a job coming up. And just something in me clicked, and I packed my bag and said goodbye to the boyfriend, and off I went and came back to Australia.
And the boyfriend stayed goodbye.
Say goodbye, yes.
Yeah.
I'm very happily married, 44 years to my darling Robert. I wouldn't change it for the world.
And you two have a very special partnership as well. So how, you talk about the way your mum and dad complemented each other. How do you two complement each other?
Very similarly. You know, Rob's my backup. Thanks, Nick. When it goes to you next time, I'll have a drink. Rob's my backup, and has always believed in me and never doubted me. And anything I sort of want to do, he's there. You know, he gives me great advice too. You know, and he helps us in the business with. He does all the form on all the horses. You know, we won the Brisbane Cup only on Saturday with a horse called Campanella that he'd found in New Zealand for very little money. About £50,000, you know, it's remarkable. And then we won 2 weeks ago with New Endeavour that we bought here at the Goffs sale, which is on, of course, Monday, and we paid 240 guineas for that. So, you know, he does the form, then I look at the horses, and together we put it together, and we've been very successful. And I just like his company, and he thinks big, you know, like he'll say, look, why don't we go and do this and that, you know, he thinks outside the box.
And as you were saying about, you know, the acting, you wanted to be Kate Blanchett or Nicole Kidman. When you started training racehorses, I guess a bit of you wanted to be your father, or as good as your father, or better.
You know, you don't realise, and anyone listening to the show who's who's got a father and son or father and daughter, you know, you don't mean to be competitive, but you do become competitive, and it's a good thing. I used to go to the stalls and get the horses ready, and by the time I got to the middle of Randwick, Dad trained all my horses. And I said, look, this is not working. I said, because I should be training the horses, and if I'm no good at it, at least I'll know. You know, I said, but if you train the horses and they win races, how am I to know if I'm going to be any good at it? Anyway, but we had a lot of success, and I wasn't going to start the horses till I knew I could kick goals. You know, and my first horse won, then my second horse won, and the first 5 horses I put down the track won, and they went from the maiden at Hawkesbury, which is just out of Sydney, to a listed race at a provincial track in a period of about 5 months. I thought, I'm going to make people sit up and pay attention.
And did they, or how quickly did they sit up and pay attention?
Slowly. You know, oh, she's got very bright lipstick, oh, we don't like her hats, oh, you know, we prefer the cousin, he's better, or so-and-so. So I was always never the first choice for owners, and I just had to keep battling away until they could say, look, gosh, you might be able to train.
I mean, the level of chauvinism when you started must have been fairly significant.
I don't think it's gone far.
Do you not?
I do not, Nick. No, I think that it's still very much so. It doesn't worry me. You know, I just, when the glass ceiling's there, I just say that's there to be, you know, chipped through. I don't see glass ceilings. You know, I only say that's where I want to be and that's where I'm going to stay. And I think if you've got that attitude in life, you've got much more chance of staying at the top for a long time.
People will look at you and say, how do you maintain the pace and how do you maintain that level of positivity?
Well, you don't always have it. You know, when you're having a dry trot, I don't care if you're a jockey or a trainer, you do doubt yourself, and that's no one wants to doubt yourself, and you do. But Rob used to say, look, you know, just get on and do it. You know how to train, just get on and do it. And so I did exactly that. You know, sometimes you just slightly move east or west of where you're doing a good job and you don't realise, and the staff don't realise, but you're not getting the winners. So you've got to readjust and say, maybe I'm not giving these horses enough work. You know, maybe I'm being a bit too kind, and I don't mean you're always kind to the animal, but, you know, they have to be fit. You ask Aidan O'Brien, none of these horses will come to Ascot and not be fit. They'll be superbly fit.
Did you think that was an area where you could get an edge? Did you identify that as somewhere where I can just tighten the screw maybe a little better than some of my competitors can.
Well, I'd been trained by Dad,
Yeah.
and Dad's horses never went to the races unless they were 100% fit. And we didn't go to the country in the provincial like we do now. Well, we don't go to the country anymore. It's getting a bit warmer in here. I take one
Is it
side.
okay now?
No, it's perfect.
It is I promise you, it is a nightmare. And I'm glad Gai's pointed this out, because I've been saying this week in, week out, for goodness knows how long, that it's either north of 100 degrees or it's the Arctic tundra. And that was long enough to hydrate as well.
You've
got to stay hydrated. We're not that good. Our director's not that good. And you'll be well familiar with that as well. So you felt that you could just take what he had and then build?
Well,
Did you feel there were areas of...
Maybe I was... Dad and I trained a horse called Pharaoh, and he was bought at the dispersal sale for the Bart Cummings had a sale, you know, a fire sale, and we bought this horse. He was $500,000 in New Zealand, and then he was resold for a lot less. And we bought him, and he broke down, and no, he won a Doncaster 16-mile race, a premier mile race at Randwick, and he broke down, and Dad sold out of him. He said, oh, you know, he's finished. And the owners said to me, would you mind continuing with him? So I spelled him, I rested him for about 8 months, and then I brought him back and took him very steadily. I basically never galloped him. He just swam. I used to say from Sydney to Auckland, I swam him nearly, basically to win the second Doncaster. And Dad turned to me after he passed the post and he said, I couldn't have done that. You know, it was so nice. I was very touched. I'm very patient with horses until they put up the white flag and say, we're not going to be any good. So I had a horse called Linesman, and I wrote to the owners and I said, he's either the slowest horse I've ever trained or the most useless, slow developing or the most useless. I said, and I hope it's the former and not the latter. Anyway, it was. He won a Sydney Cup. But, you know, he couldn't show it until he was a little bit older and stronger and more mature. He was a New Zealand bred, and they take more time.
What is the, you touch on it there, what is the secret to having good relationships with owners or sustaining relationships with owners?
You must keep in contact with them. Even here, I'm sitting in the studio in London. I've spoken to several of my owners this morning. They know I'm overseas. They're appreciative that if their horse failed in Brisbane yesterday or won in Sydney, talking about the Goff sale, I'm talking about horses we'll be buying that we're targeting in the next 24 hours. So they love that. They love to be kept in touch, this sort of keeping back and saying, oh, they're the owners, and they're the paying customer. They want to know. And in all their businesses, they get emails and they reply to them immediately. Why wouldn't we the same with... I write all the letters for our stable to anyone who's got a grumble or a grump. I do all that correspondence for Adrian to the owners. I think it's very important.
So there's a meticulousness to it, but also there is, again, a performance element, isn't there?
Yes.
Only insofar as we are a great entertainment industry.
Absolutely.
I wonder the extent to which you think we as a whole are appreciative enough of that concept.
Well, that's why I do my TikTok and my Instagrams. You know, I don't do them all the time. I love doing them. I really enjoy doing them. But, you know, why not say to people it's fun? You know, you can buy a horse and have a share in a horse or a whole horse and have fun. You know, you go to the football or the cricket, you don't dress up. The girls can dress up and wear all their glad rags and their bling. I put the bling on. Pascal pearls.
I knew. I mean, I was expecting the best.
I knew.
To be fair,
I didn't want to let you down.
So I have to let you into a secret. So Gai did contact me this morning and said, "Is it audio or is this a visual enterprise?" Well, I said, "No. We're on TV today." Gai said, "Well, I will make sure I put my best, you know, my glad rags on and get properly glammed up. I've never seen you anything other."
Well, I think it's important. You know, you ask people, or people might buy a horse for £1 million and put it in your yard. They don't want to see you like a slob turning up. I thought George was so nicely dressed. I thought, what a sharp young guy when I was talking to him in the green room outside. Talking of which, this is a green room.
It is.
Nick gave me the tip, said, don't wear green. I now know why. You'll disappear into the background.
Otherwise, you'll disappear. Yeah. We're going to have to bring scruffy Neil Channing on in a minute just to make you look. I think he's entertaining Robbie outside at the moment.
Yes, they're both learning from each other.
Yeah, I think that's a punter's paradise out there at the moment. I wouldn't mind a fly on the wall. Just going back to that, though, you're saying you're enjoying the social media, you enjoy the TikTok and that side of it, and embracing the new. How important is it for your yard to succeed, for you to embrace as many young people within it as possible?
Well, you have to keep... Look, youth is everything. You learn from youth. It keeps the business going. Our clientele are probably, and I'm sure it would work over here too, but probably your people with the most dollars or pounds to spend, probably a little bit older than the younger generation. But the younger generation can come and have a share in a horse. Like in Australia, we train for 1 or 2 syndicates that have 1,000 owners. Now, they don't feel they've got 1,000th of that horse. They feel that horse is theirs, and rightly so. But, you know, and the syndicate owners look after them and take them to the races and do all that. We give the information out to the syndicates and then they pass it on.
I'd love to know how you found big race days over the last few months compared to what you've got back home. How, for example, did you enjoy the Kentucky Derby, 151st Kentucky Derby?
I've never enjoyed a race meeting more, Nick. You were there. It's mind-boggling, isn't it? And when those horses walk up, what your viewers, they're racing on dirt, and it rained that day, so it was a quagmire. And the people, the connections, are walking down the track.
That's my favourite bit of it.
Yeah, and look, I had tears in my eyes, and I thought, you know, even if they don't win the race, to be there and to walk down that hallowed sort of dirt, to be there. And then the other thing is that you're lucky enough being in the press, but the press and the jockey valets are allowed on the track. Could you imagine being on at Epsom or Ascot on the track, and they're the horses only that far away?
I always say, when people ask about various events around the world, I always say that there isn't an event with that kind of internal energy to it. That sort of, I just can't describe it. Those few minutes around the race are just different to anything else.
And, you know, it's very, very well organised. You know, we were staying in a gaming pub. We had a racetrack on one side and a car park on the other, so it was pretty bland. We were there within 20 minutes on the bus into the racetrack. And I think the best business in the whole racetrack was their store, where they were selling sort of merchandise, and people buying 10 T-shirts, and I mean, it was like mass buying, and you couldn't move in the place. You were like this, Nick. And there wasn't one outlet at Kentucky. There were 10 of them.
Yeah, it's a huge production, isn't it? Yeah. You know, 200 million on the new paddock and all the rest of it. Now, by contrast, our poor Derby has taken a bit of a battering in recent weeks. The weather wasn't great and the crowd was down and so on. What did you make of the day as a whole?
Sensational.
You still loved it?
Fabulous. And anyone who knocks it must be blind, because I was lucky enough to go with great friends, Peter and Francis Stanley, and a group of their friends, and we walked the track in the morning. And I'd never done that, and I found that, first of all, I found it that I could get around it. I thought, I've had a knee operation, a foot operation, will I be able not break down halfway through? But it was great, Nick. And Tattenham Corner, how tight it is, and the camber, and it was just fabulous. But, you know, everyone who was there is literally, I've got a running eye, everyone there was just fascinated by the horses, and that's what I think you don't see in every other country.
So you still think there's that engagement here?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
That you might not see elsewhere. That's very interesting.
No, I think so. But English people love their racing, love their sport. And, you know, look, crowds are down all over the world. You know, you go to Australia or New Zealand, the crowds are down. You know, it's probably only Hong Kong or Japan that the crowds have maintained. The Kentucky Derby, you get it once a year. You go to Rob and I went one December to... I'll think of it in a second. Aqueduct. Oh, my God. There was you and me on the racecourse.
That's sublime to the ridiculous.
Oh, Aqueduct. It was freezing cold. It was so cold. There was no one there, only very poor people. And they literally made the races 10 minutes apart because it was so cold. But, you know, the average day on a Wednesday, there's three men and a dog, aren't there, at the races?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that's just life.
Aqueduct, normally, if you breathe in for long enough, you'll just get a waft of ganja and kerosene from the aeroplane coming over
Yes.
coming over from JFK. That's about all you get, and there will be about 3 people there. I'm always interested in what other people think of our racing for that very reason. We've been doing all this navel gazing in recent weeks. I think people will be quite refreshed by what you've had to say. I was very interested in your passion for saving Rosehill Racecourse. Perhaps just for those who aren't aware, I know that we could probably spend about 5 days talking about it, but briefly, what were they trying to do and what's happened now?
Well, they're trying to sell the racetrack. Firstly, they didn't own the racetrack. It was owned by the members of the Sydney Turf Club. That was bought in the 1940s, and then the Sydney Turf Club was taken over by the AJC, Australian Jockey Club. Mm-hmm. And they amalgamated, and the 4 tracks became one under that. Racing New South Wales has become a lot stronger, and in their strength have taken over the gaming dollar. So the money going to the racetracks is now distributed from an upper body, Racing New South Wales or Racing Victoria, wherever you are. But they give out the money. Nikki, you'll get this, and Gai, you'll get that. Well, that's no good. You know, you've got to make it that the racetracks can sustain. Yeah. And not be in debt. So the AJC were in debt for many millions of dollars, and they thought in their wisdom to sell Rosehill was a brilliant plan, and so did the minister. And they'd put a rail line right next to it. So they thought we put 25,000 homes there, and it'd become another little Bombay, and, you know, wouldn't that be marvellous, the rail? But the money they were offering, firstly, it's in the never, never. It's 10 years to pay you. Hello, would you sell your house and wait 10 years? Of course you wouldn't, Nick. The other thing was that we owe the AJC, so that'd have to be paid. And the final thing, of course, would be they'd ask for a contribution to the rail. And you would see the money that went to the purchase of Rosehill, a small pool, not enough.
So the members have now voted against, haven't they? So the ATC members have voted against. And is that it done and dusted and it is saved, or is it still in peril?
You pray. Well, at present it's done and dusted, and they should get on and refurbish. You know, to go and buy another track and build it the way you want it with the facilities that Rosehill has, or the same with one of your leading, say I'm selling York. Hello? What would all the Yorkshire people say? They'd be up in arms.
Well, there'd be mutiny, yeah.
There'd be mutiny. Now, the same with Rosehill. Rosehill is one of our major tracks. There are only 2 you can have Group 1 races on. And it's a very good track, and it's in the inner part of Sydney, you know. So, hello, why would you even think of it? You know, it's a... Anyway, it's present, it's done and dusted. And I was
doing some work on the podcast on it. It got pretty nasty, didn't it? You had some
very
horrible
personal
stuff written about you as well. Did that just strengthen your resolve to fight even harder? Silly question, really, wasn't it? Of course it did.
Well, Nick, it's, you know, if they're going to get nasty, I don't have to get nasty. I knew that that our cause was one that anyone who loved racing would be for. But we became very personal, and of course they were bribing and they have no right to. It was illegal what they were doing. They were bribing the members and saying, look, we'll give you 5 years free membership, we'll give you $1,000 each year of, you know, food and beverage. Hello, you can't do that. You know, it should be a very even do or no, yes or no.
How seriously do you take your role as an ambassador, really, for the sport?
Oh, very seriously. You know, I love racing. It's Rob's and our son Tom. We've got 2 children, Tom and Kate, and you know, we just live and breathe racing. That's our life. And when you see something stupid and totally irresponsible on the government and you know, Racing New South Wales acting that way, you've got to stand up and say, look, no, we can't do that. We've got to stick to our guns.
And in terms of, you know, as you said earlier, being an ambassador in terms of communicating the joy of the sport, that must be something that gives you a lot of pleasure.
It really does. And I want people to come to the races and enjoy it and have a longevity, that they're, you know, involved in horses, not just for a year or 2, but for a long time, and hopefully have great success.
And in terms of your stable at the moment, what are you most looking forward to? Who's really putting the fire in your belly?
Funny enough, quite a few imports. Horse Vauban, of course, that he was bought. Rob said, you must buy him. But I said, he's failed twice in the Cup. Why would we want to buy him? And I said, how can I improve on Willie Mullins? And Vauban came out and won first up over 10 furlongs.
This is it.
You must have known I was going to say that.
We don't just throw this thing together, Gai.
Well done.
And he's a horse who has got a little more pace, perhaps, than we were giving him credit for, it seems.
I think so. You know, it's very different. You know, John Gosden once said to me, you know, why didn't you ring up and ask me, you know, about the horse you bought? And I said, look, John, I hate to tell you, it's the upside down cake. I said, whatever we do in Australia is so different to what you do here. I said, we're best just to sit, look at the horse and just try to, what do they say, can't run further than a mile, and it runs 2 miles in Australia. It doesn't go on the slop. Well, we don't have slop, but, you know, the slow track in Australia can handle. Whatever it can't do, often can do, not always in Australia. The climate's different, the feed we give them is different. They're out and about a lot more, just all sorts of things. And I'm not saying it's better or worse, but you've got to just train that animal you get as though you know nothing about it and you're meeting it as a first one-on-one.
So Vauban, you can go back for a third crack at the Cup, of course.
Well,
which
we'll try.
Will.
We'll try.
And does he feel like a happy horse at the moment?
He's very happy, very happy. Look, you know, the trouble is over here, and it's just the way, you're in your box a long time, whereas in Australia you're out and about, and you go for what we call spells, you know, little breaks, little rests, and you can't beat a holiday. So they come to Australia and they very quickly have a little spell, a little break, and we find in the first year they grow about a hand and a bit. It's amazing, isn't it?
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
But I suppose when they're coming to you, they're quite often, what are they normally, sort of 4, 5, 3? Yeah, 3 or 4.
3 to 5.
So they still should have a bit of natural development in them, shouldn't they?
I think Willie would say, my gosh, he's grown. And he has grown, yes, even at 7. He was a late maturer. And he did all that for Willie over here. You know, he's a lovely horse. He's a very kind temperament.
And of course now he looks like the greatest buy of all time.
Well, hopefully if he wins the Cup, he'll be the greatest buy of all times.
And you know, you've won record-breaking 8 Golden Slippers. But how, having that Cup on the CV, if it weren't there...
Oh, it'd be a big hole.
Yeah.
You know, people say, oh, you know, don't need to win. It's a race. Maybe it's like the Gold Cup this Thursday at Ascot. You know, it's a real feather in your cap. And there he is.
Fiorente.
Fiorente. He was a lovely horse. He took a long time to purchase him. I saw him at Newmarket, and I said to Rob, my God, I said, he's the most handsome horse I've ever seen. I said, and we put an offer of, I think, 700,000 guineas there on the spot. And the man said, oh, no. He said, I'm taking him to the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, which, of course, he went off and didn't do very well. And then he came on the market again. There was a lot of, you know, trying to get him the different agents. Anyway, Hubie de Burgh was able to secure him for us, and he came to Australia and he went into quarantine. Nick, he stepped out that morning of the Cup. He went to Flemington, he ran second, paid his purchase price. End of com, boom. And then we took him back, he ran, I think, 2 Group 1s and a couple of other group races leading up to the Cup, and then he won the Cup. He was fabulous.
You're not going to go home without a few more horses, are you?
No.
No. And are our eyes on?
Well, we've done our homework and we're ready to go tomorrow to the Goff sale, and we're looking forward to it. And hopefully we can secure, you know, hopefully they're not ridiculously priced and we can secure for our owners.
And what for you might not be ridiculously priced, we might think, oh, my word, Gai's paid a lot. But the money you can win back is pretty significant.
As I said, you know, we won our purchase price literally in the first race, and running second, not winning.
And is it getting harder? Is it getting harder to buy the good ones?
Oh, it's much harder, much more expensive. And the Australian dollar's very weak. So it's hard for Australians to purchase because the dollar's so weak. But it doesn't stop them. You know, they're a tenacious nation. They like, you know, and they love their racing. And the prize money's there.